Hi, hello, and welcome for this third episode of the French Playground. So today we're going to talk about a topic that most of you don't really like, but which is essential for the French language. So we're going to talk about conjugation. We're going to see how to understand all those tables that might be a bit complicated for you if you don't have a Latin mother tongue. So the French conjugation can be complex because we have mood, we have different tenses, and it's not working like English. It's very similar to Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish. But if you don't speak or if you don't learn any of those languages, it might be a bit difficult. So today we're going to try to break down all the vocabulary and the way those tables are working and how can you use them efficiently in your journey to learn French. So you can have different type of conjugation table. Some very simplistic one with this one, which is the verb aller at the present tense, and you can have some more complex one, like the second one, where you have different moods and different tenses. So first, what are those moods? Why do we use moods? Well, we separate the tenses in different moods to express different things. If I want to give indication, I'm using the indicative. If I want to say something which is personal, so subjective, I'm going to use the subjunctive. If it's something that might happen, I'm going to use the conditional. And if I want to give an order, I'm going to use the imperative mood. So those are the ones that we call personal moods. Why? Because we're going to use the personal pronouns like je, tu, il, elle, on, nous, vous, il, and elle, plural. But we also have some moods that are not using those pronouns. They call them impersonal because we don't use them. So you have the infinitive, we use just to name the action. So that's the raw form of the verb. You have the participles. We use them mainly as adjectives to describe. And then you have the gerundive that we use for circumstances. You might also see those two things on those conjugation tables, la voix active et la voix passive. That sounds a bit complicated, but it's actually very simple. When you use the active voice, that means the subject is doing the action. When you have the passive voice, the subject puts up the action. So, for example, if you say je mange la pomme, the subject is je, so I eat the apple. Je is doing the action here. For the passive voice, you can have la pomme est mangée. The apple is eaten. Here, the apple puts up the action. You also have, usually in those tables, a part for the composite tense. We have plenty of composite tense, as you can see. The most famous one is passé composé. You can have le plus que parfait, passé antérieur, le futur antérieur, le subjonctif passé, le conditionnel passé, l'infinitif passé et l'impératif passé. That sounds a bit complicated, but if you understand how they all work the same way. The only thing that's going to change is avoir ou être. They're going to be conjugated at another tense. But basically, how do they work? We always have avoir ou être conjugated at a certain tense. So if we take the example of passé composé, they're going to be conjugated at the present tense. And then we're going to add the past participle. If I take, for example, plus que parfait, avoir ou être are going to be conjugated at the imperfect tense, and you're still going to have that past participle. So we separate them because the functionment is a bit different. For composite tense, you're going to need avoir ou être, while for the simple tense, you're going to need a root to which you're going to apply different endings according to the person you want to conjugate it. If we take the example of the indicative mood, so it's the mood with the most tenses in it. How does it work? We have some past tenses, we have a present tense, and we have two future tenses. In the past, we're going to have passé composé, which is the one we usually learn the first, to talk about a short and over action. And then we have the imperfect that we use to do description and to talk about something that lasts, the duration. And finally, you have plus que parfait to express that something happened before those two tenses. So this is how those three tenses are working together. You also have two extra tenses at the indicative mood past. Le passé simple et le passé antérieur. I usually don't spend a lot of time on those two tenses because we don't use them daily when we're talking, or maybe in some few expressions, or if you want to talk in a very special way. But they're more used in literature, and they are very irregular, so I know you don't like them, so I try to avoid them. When you arrive to a most advanced level, it's actually easier to understand how they work and to use them. But basically, le passé simple worked exactly the same way as le passé composé, short and over action. Le passé antérieur worked like plus que parfait to express something that happened before the imperfect and passé composé. Now, if we talk about the future, we're going to have the future simple. And if I'm talking about something that's going to happen, but I want to precise that something will happen before that main event, I'm going to use futur antérieur. So futur antérieur work a bit like le plus que parfait. So when I'm talking about an action past or future, and I want to go back in the past, I'm going to use those two tenses. The other informations that you might see on those conjugation table. You can have the group of the verb. So if you remember, in French, we have three different groups. The first group is very regular. So usually, if you're struggling with a verb because it's from the second or the third group, try to find if there is the equivalent in the first group. How do we know that a verb is from the first group? Well, it ends by ER. So those verbs are definitely your friends. And then you have the second groups. So they end by IR, but it's a bit difficult because not all the verbs ending by IR are going to be of the second group. Sometimes they can be of the third group. So how do we know it? We just learn it, which is a bit annoying. And the third group is the one I call the artistic group because you have plenty of different scheme of verbs, different patterns. So this one is a bit more difficult, but you can try to put verbs that are working the same way together, and then usually they follow the same pattern on every tense. Another thing you might see on those conjugation table is transitif ou intransitif. That sounds a bit weird. So when you have a transitive verb, that means you can use the COD. For example, the verb I used as an example before, manger. Je mange quoi? Here I can put a complement. So that's going to be a transitive verb. So if you can put a direct complement, je mange quoi? Une pomme. It's going to be called transitive direct. It can be transitive indirect if you can put an indirect object complement. Those are a bit complicated for beginners, but when you start to learn a bit more about conjugation, it's going to help you. Why? Because transitive verb in composed tense work with avoir, and intransitive verbs in the composed tense going to work with être. And finally, the last information you can find is pronominal. So in English, we call them reflexive. I know a lot of you don't like them at all, and you often forget about them, but they're very important. How do we know that a verb is pronominal? Because at the infinitive form, you can see the little se, se, or just s apostrophe. What does that mean if a verb is pronominal? That means we're doing the action on ourselves. For example, if you take the verb laver, which means to wash, I can say Je lave la maison. I'm washing the house, or I'm cleaning the house. Here it's a classic verb. If I say il se lave, that means he's washing himself. So he's doing the action on himself. You can have plenty of verbs working that way. They have the pronominal form and the non-pronominal form. If you take, for example, the verb entendre, to hear, j'entends, I hear, je m'entends, I hear myself. So I understand myself. Okay, now where can I find those tables? Where can I be sure that I've got the good conjugation? Today I'm gonna talk about 3 websites that are great. I know you all find some that you like, so you have to work with the one that is the most convenient for you and the easiest for you. So we're gonna call about the first one, Becherel, and then you have toute la conjugaison, et enfin les verbes. So if we look to the first one, les verbes. So I really like how it's presented because it's simple. Here you have the verbs that are conjugated most often, and you can type the verb you're looking for. So we're going to try with manger and conjugated it. So here you have all the information I told you about earlier. First group, we use avoir in the composed tense. It's a transitive verb, and we can do a pronominal form. With that verb, it's actually a bit weird to say je me mange, because that means I eat myself. So you're not going to use the pronominal form quite often. Then if we look here, you have the indicative with all the tenses, the subjunctive, conditional, imperative, infinitive, and participles. You also have the rules of conjugation. So sometimes there is some small thing that might change, which is very well explained here. And then you have verbs. So they're not synonyms, they are verbs that are working exactly the same way and the same conjugation. Now, if we look to toute la conjugaison. Some people like it. I'm not the biggest fan because it's a bit messy. But what's great about this website is you have the conjugation, but you also have exercises and lessons if you want to make sure that you got the good understanding of how that verb or the tense is working. So same if we look for a verb, the same verb, manger. Here you have the different moods, indicative, conditional, subjunctive, imperative, and then you have the infinitive and the participle. You also have some notes about if there is any special thing for this verb, and then you have the exercise, and again you have other verbs that work exactly the same way. And finally, so this one is my favorite, and I probably already told you about this one. So it's very well made, and you have different options. So you have an application if you want to improve your spelling. You can do also some online dictation. You have some quiz about tenses if you just want to be sure that you remember everything. And for the youngest one, you also have some games. If you go here, you have different things and you have plenty of different options. So my advice is go to this website, just take a bit of time to explore it because it's very well made. And then you also have the conjugation option. So again, with the verb manger, let's conjugate it. So here it's actually a bit different. So you have the words that are similar in the spelling, different verbs. And here you have the exact verb. So I can see that I have manger, the transitive, direct, and intransitive verb of the first group, and I have the pronominal verb, se manger. So here I want to look to manger, and it's actually very well presented and easy to find what you want. I have the indicative mode, subjunctive, imperative, infinitive, participle, and conditional. Here I've got kind of the ID card of the verb, which is introduced again here. I can go to the composed tense, just here, And again, I've got all the modes, but with the composed tense. And finally, you also have the active and the passive voice. So if I go back to the simple tense, passive, so if I want to say that the apple was eaten, I can say, hop, elle était mangée, and find it here. If I want to say, I was eating the apple, I just need to go there and have my active voice. Je mangeais la pomme. So it's actually easy to find information once you know what to find on this website. So how to use those tables efficiently for your learning? There's several possibilities. For the beginners, you can, for example, do the very basic one like this one, just the verb at the present tense, the translation if you need it. To update yourself sometimes, just have a look at it to make sure that you remember them. And just the fact that you are writing them, it's going to help you to remember them. When you arrive to a most advanced level, for example, with the passé composé, a lot of past participle are irregular. So what you can do, you can write the past participle that you're struggling with. You can, for example, do the same with the subjunctive, if the conditional, work on the verbs that you're struggling with. You can also use those verbs to write sentences because it might be easier for you to remember better an irregular verbs when it's put in the context. So have some verb, and we can of course correct that together during the classes. But it's always good to have somewhere one of those small tables. In case of a doubt, you can just have a small look at it and make sure that it's the correct ending, it's the correct root, because they all got different roots. So basically, they're very important, and my advice is make one. You can find some online ones. If you want something very complete, you can also have some conjugation book which explain all the conjugation, but it's also great for you to do an actual one, so it's personal and it fit to your need. So we arrived to the end of that video. I would like to thanks you again because you're supporting me every day and you're helping me to get better, I hope. You also give me some material to work on and give me some idea of videos. I hope you still enjoy them. If you have any questions, if you want me to talk about any topic, please feel free to send me your questions and I will be more than happy to answer them. I wish you a good weekend and hopefully I'll see you next Sunday.